Why do we have floppy outside ears instead of just a hole?
What are those hair cells that everyone's talking about?
Is there a snail in my ear?
And why do we need to appreciate endo lymph more? These are the questions we're gonna answer!
The outer ear is called the auricle, or pinna. The most superior portion is called the helix. Where the helix connects to the head is called the crus of the helix. Inferior to the helix is the depression called the scaphoid fascia. Inferior to the scaphoid fascia is the antihelix, and the portion of the antihelix that creates the depression is a triangular fascia. This is called the crura of the antihelix. Inferior to the antihelix is the antitragus. Adjacent to the antitragus is the tragus, which is not seen in this model. Between the antitragus and the tragus is a depression known as the intertragal notch. The most inferior portion of the auricle is the lobe, or the lobule. The middle auricle is the concha, where sound can be transferred to the external auditory canal. The concha can be divided into two parts, the superior being the cymba concha, and the inferior being the cavum concha. The external auditory canal is not a landmark of the auricle, however it is still part of the outer ear. The EAC has a lateral 1/3 portion that is cartilaginous, and a medial 2/3 portion which is bone. The canal allows sound to travel to the tympanic membrane, which has 3 layers: the skin, fibrous, and a mucosal layer. The tympanic membrane is the division between the outer ear and the middle ear. The middle ear is divided into 2 cavities. The superior part is the epitympanic recess, or the attic, and the inferior portion is the mesotympanum cavity. The 3 smallest bones in the human body are in the middle ear. The most lateral bone is the malleus. Landmarks of the malleus include the manubrium, which is the part that is embedded in the fibrous membrane of the tympanic membrane. The bone that articulates to the malleus is the incus, which has a lenticular process, which is the portion that articulates with the stapes. The most important landmark of the stapes is the footplate. It presses against the oval window into the inner ear. We will cover more of the functions of the bones later, but for now we will keep labeling the middle ear. Along with the bones of the middle ear are 6 ligaments. There are 3 on the malleus bone, which are the superior malleolar ligament, the lateral malleolar ligament, and the anterior malleolar ligament. There are 2 on the incus bone, which are the posterior ligament of the incus and the superior ligament of the incus, which is not pictured, but as you would guess, it attaches from the incus to the superior wall. There is also one on the stapes, and it is called the annular ligament. There are 2 muscles in the middle ear, the tensor tympani and the stapedius muscle. The tensor tympani enters through the anterior wall
Through the cochlear uniform process.
The stapedius muscle enters through the pyramidal eminence, and the stapedial tendon is attached here. These muscles contract when loud noises are present. This protects against the damage of loud sounds.
What's the point of the muscles if we aren't exposed to loud sounds all the time?
Well, it's theorized that the loudest sound that we're exposed to every day is our own voice, so the muscles are there to protect us from the sound of our own voice.
Oh.
There are 6 walls of the middle ear. The superior includes the tegmen tympani, the inferior, the jugular fascia. Lateral, which is not pictured here, has the tympanic membrane proper, which is the mucus layer of the tympanic membrane and the squamous portion of the temporal bone. The medial wall is bordering the inner ear. On the medial wall are 2 windows, the oval window and the round window. Also on the medial wall is a promontory of the cochlea. Close to the promontory of the cochlea is the tympanic nerve. The prominence of lateral semicircular canal and prominence of the facial canal on the other landmarks of the medial wall. On the posterior wall is the tympanic adytus, the chorda tympani nerve, the fossa incus, which is not visible in this photo, and the pyramidal eminence. The anterior wall has a eustachian tube, the canal of tensor tympani muscle, the cochlear-form process, and the choroid canal. Some of these landmarks have auditory pathway functions that will be mentioned later. Next is the inner ear. The entrance into the inner ear is the vestibule,
Which is behind the footplate of the stapes.
The cochlea can be divided into bony or membranous labyrinths. The bony labyrinth can be divided even further. The scala vestibuli and the scala tympani are both filled with a fluid called perilymph. It's important to note that although the Latin name for cochlea means snail, the cochlea isn't something that can necessarily be removed like a snail from a garden, nor can it be unrolled. It is a system of tunnels that run through the temporal bone. As mentioned before, the inner ear also has a membranous labyrinth, which is the scala media or the cochlear duct. There are two membranes in the cochlea: Reisner's membrane between the scala vestibuli and the scala media, and the basilar membrane between the scala tympani and the scala media. Their functions will be discussed more later. The spiral lamina, which is the bony portion, the spiral ligament, which supports the scala media, and the stria vascularis, which produces endolymph and supplies oxygen and nutrients to the cochlea. The superstar of the cochlea is the end organ for hearing. It is called the organ of Corti. Inside the organ of Corti are the inner hair cells, inner hair cell cilia, the outer hair cells, and the outer hair cell cilia. There's also Corti's arch, the supporting pillars, tectorial membrane, which is a gelatinous membrane that is fixed on its inner edge and has outer hair cell embedded in it. Spiral ganglion, which are cell bodies that form a swelling linked by synapses, kind of linked to inner hair cells. In other words, they're nerves. There are three semicircular canals: the superior canal, the posterior canal, and the horizontal canal. Both the superior canal and the posterior canal share the same leg, also known as the crus commune. The horizontal canal is nearly parallel to the ground, and they all open to the vestibule. The semicircular canals open to the vestibule. There are three ampullae. Each of the semicircular canals return to the utricle through the bulbs known as the ampullae. The ampulla each have a crista, which are the end organ for the semicircular canals. The pinna channels acoustic energy into the form of sound waves. Imagine the yellow piece of paper as a sound wave. The pinna, with all the depressions and eminences, funnel the sound wave into the external auditory canal. These sound waves then hit the tympanic membrane, which causes it to vibrate, thus changing the energy from acoustic to mechanical. The malleus is connected to the tympanic membrane, which starts the motion of the ossicles, hence the mechanical energy. The outer ear is tonotopically organized to aid in the transmission of high frequencies sounds between 1500 and 7000 Hz. Because of the malleus and the incus are connected, the inward and outer movement of the umbo of the tympanic membrane causes these to rotate. This transmits the force onto the stapes, which results in the inward and outward motion of the oval window. Each of these ossicles is also specifically set by its ligamental connections with the middle ear. This movement of the ossicles can also be described as impedance matching system because the middle ear acts as a kind of hydraulic press in which the effective area of the eardrum is about 17 times that of the stapes footplate. Thus, the force caused by a given sound pressure in the air acting on the area of the eardrum is concentrated through the ossicles onto the small area of the footplate, resulting in pressure increase proportional to the ratio of the areas of the two structures. When the oval window is displaced by the footplate of the stapes, the annular ligament around the footplate stretches and displaces the perilymph at the basal end of the cochlea. This starts a new wave toward the apex of the cochlea. Because the fluid of the inner ear are non-compressible, when these fluids are inwardly displaced at the oval window, the round window membrane must yield by moving into the middle ear. Now that the two windows are out of phase, when one is pushed inward, the other must move upward. Sound vibrations that are introduced to the scala vestibuli are conducted into the scala media by the yielding of Reisner's membrane. The green mucosal lining seen in this photo represents the Reisner's membrane as well as the basilar membrane. The endolymph becomes disturbed and the vibrations continue, and the basal membrane is displaced as well. This results in the round window displacement. The basilar membrane reacts more to vibrations of the inner ear than do most of the other structures. Because the organ of Corti resides on this membrane, the vibrations are transmitted to it. The stereocilia on the tips of the outer hair cells are embedded within the tectorial membrane. When the basilar membrane moves up and down in response to fluid displacement caused by the in and out movement of the stapes, the hair cells are twisted in a complex manner. Part of this twisting is assisted by the fact that the basilar membrane and the tectorial membrane have slightly different axes of rotation and slide in opposite directions as they are moved up and down. The specific function of the outer hair cells is to enhance the reception of sound by the inner hair cells by shortening themselves, thereby bringing the inner hair cells into contact with the tectorial membrane. They also sharpen the wave of the basilar membrane, which improves frequency specific to the cochlea. They are also known as cochlear amplifiers. The sloshing of the endolymph causes the tectorial membrane to move and react to the cilia of inner hair cells. This transmits the neurological signal to the spiral ganglion. The signal travels medially through the cochlear nerve to the rest of the auditory pathway. The cochlea has about 2.5 turns. For sound waves with lower frequency, it takes a longer time for them to reach their maximum peak, so these frequencies show maximum displacement at the apex of the cochlea. Whereas high frequency have faster rise times, so their maximum displacement is at the base of the cochlea. The vestibular system is controlled by the cerebellum. The vestibular system needs visual input for spatial information. It uses proprioception to let us know where our bodies are in space. It maintains equilibrium and signals our ocular motor system and tells us what way to go. The semicircular canals respond to angular acceleration, and the utricle and saccula responds to linear acceleration.